welcome to Alaska's Political Pipeline. I'm political reporter Wil Courtney, sitting down alongside me, former Anchorage Mayor Dave Bronson. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Will. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're talking to all the gubernatorial candidates leading up to this election, now just a few days away. Why don't you tell me a little bit about why you ran for office?
Well, I was approached last summer by some folks, and they said, back then, Mary Peltola was considering running, and they said, we believe you're the only person that can beat her. The polling, the modeling is saying that. And then later on, it changed to Tom, and the same analysis came by. I thought I think I have a lot to offer this position. I've held the position that's most closely related to the governor's job, which is the mayor of Anchorage. Governed through a very difficult time, led the city out of COVID, and kind of got us back into business, even as I had a challenging relationship with the Anchorage Assembly. So I think that experience is what I bring to the table, and in preparation for that job.
Yeah. Tell me about the moment that you decided you wanted to run for office. You said you had some people talking to you about Peltola and then Begich running. What was the moment that you said, okay, I need to step in?
Well, I don't think there was a moment. There was a process, because you bring in your advisors, your team, your mentors, and you say, hey, I'm approached. This is what they're saying about the numbers, the polling, and should I do this? And because for me, I worked all my life to get to the point where I'm at, which is to hunt and fish and fly, be retired, have the time to use all the stuff that you've accumulated over your lifetime. And so it was a challenge there for me. But I believe in public service. I'm not in a position, I'm not a young person where I have to have this job to pay the bills. I just don't. I think I've got something to offer. And that's why I made the decision. So it was a process over several weeks.
Yeah, there's a lot of different people in this field, 17-person field with a lot of different experiences. Yours, former Anchorage mayor, how do you think that translates over to the gubernatorial role?
Oh, I think it translates directly from the mayor's office, and also I was the director at Ted Stevens International Airport last year. The governor appointed me to that, and I had about 480 people reporting to me there. If you look at it, political executive experience, Bill Walker and I are the only two in this race that have that. I think it's important because it's kind of like there's people in the race who are saying, elect me, I don't have any government experience. That's like saying a professional hockey player saying, I'm a great hockey player, I want to be your NFL quarterback. It doesn't make sense. Somehow we've got this mentality in this country where anybody can be a politician on the elected or on the executive side, on the mayor, governor, president side. No, it's very difficult. It's a job you got to learn, and it takes experience to learn that, obviously. And there's no schools for it. Yeah. So I brought up many years of life experience in the military world, leadership positions in the military, in the corporate world as a wide body airline captain, and then certainly the role as director of the airport and the mayor. So I brought that to the table, and I think I'm uniquely qualified in that way.
What do you think the state needs right now in terms of executive leadership?
It needs very thorough engagement at every level. There's a lot of things that are not functioning well in our government. And I'm not here to blame any one administration. I think I say this routinely, this has been coming on for nearly 40 years. Our financial crisis create this. We're kind of in a spiral downwards, and focused on the fiscal issues. I think structurally, our natural resources, everything's in place to have a very robust, very positive future. I'm very excited about Alaska going forward, but there's things government has to do. Government has got to get to yes on all the critical projects. When private enterprise comes in and says we want to build a gas line, when we want to build a road to mining districts, the government's job is to get to yes, both state and federal. We faced a lot of challenges in that. We had a previous federal administration had 70 executive orders restricting development in Alaska, more restrictive orders, more executive orders against Alaska than they had against Iran. So that's a bit of a challenge. So we've reversed the federal government now. It's going so fast, the state's struggling to keep up with what the federal government wants to do positively in Alaska. And I think that's what we need to to cooperate with and get government moving.
What do you think the relationship is between the executive of the state and the cooperation with the delegation, not only the delegation, but also the presidency as well? What's your approach to working with the federal side of Alaska?
Well, I proved that as the mayor. I worked with Mary Peltola's office. I worked with Dan Sullivan's office. I worked with Senator Murkowski's office. Well, you have to do that. You know, when you get into office, you learn quickly campaigning is over and now it's into governance. And those two things are very separate functions, very separate professions. And you've got to calm things down. The campaign's over, but you've got to move government forward. You just can't sit back and relax. You've got to be very, very engaged on all levels. So, and Senator Murkowski, you know, we have differences politically a little bit. I've got great differences with Mary Peltola, but we worked together and we pulled together for what we thought was best for the state.
And then tell me, going from the federal side to the more state side, you know, we've had a governor who's made historic headlines when it comes to working with the legislature, or lack thereof. I know in this last session he set a new record for the amount of vetoes in a single session. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the approach that you want to take if you're elected governor to working with the legislature?
Well, I think in government, I'll use an example. A mentor of mine, Don Young, he said, Dave, you got to get the work done. You just have to go. You have to go to junior or TC to get the job done. And of course, Don was quite conservative, and I didn't agree with him on everything, but I consider him a mentor and a friend. He says, Dave, I have a weekly scheduled lunch with Mary or with the Speaker of the House at the time, which was. I was going to say Mary Peltola, but wasn't that? Nancy Pelosi, sorry. And her husband, a weekly dinner. And he says, and I went to those dinners and we worked with her. And he says, we were diametrically opposed politically. But you know what that manifested itself into was Pelosi would tell her staff and tell House leadership, she says, whenever Don Young asks for something, just give it to him because it's not worth the fight. Mm-hmm. But he had a very personal relationship with, and I think that's what I look forward to going down with Senate and House leadership and having those personal relationships. If you want somebody to go down there and scream at, say, another Republican or another Democrat or something, I'm not your guy. I'm not going to do that. You got to work with folks, even as you fight for your conservative principles. Make no mistake about it, I'm a conservative. And I think conservative values are what's best for the state to develop our resources and create the prosperity we need so our kids young people like you can come up here and afford to live. I'm sure you're exposed to that right now. It's through conservative principles and values that we have prosperity in the state. And so that's what I'm going to work for.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about why you chose governor in particular? I mean, there's a lot of seats that are open, not only just in the state legislature. There's, 50 seats in the state legislature open. We also have an open House seat. You have an open Senate seat. What was it about the governor that you said?
Well, you can only run for 2 seats. Mm-hmm. Your Senate and your House. Mm-hmm. and the Senate's, they're held by 2 guys that I know. The Senate by a good friend of mine. And I wasn't going to depose him. And also coming back to the form of government, I don't think I would make a great legislator. I'm more of an executive type leadership position. You know, the military, the airlines, the mayor's job, the airport job. I like to stand or fall on my own merits, and not have to come in. And the first focus is always, well, how am I going to figure out a compromise? No, I'm going to push for what I want, and then eventually be forced into some kind of compromise if necessary. And that it just fits my nature better. I really have no interest in being a legislator.
Why don't you tell me a little bit now, as we go into the policy portion of this conversation, right. What's your number one issue going into the 2026 primary?
Well, I got this asked twice yesterday in interviews, and it's my number one issue is the top 12 issues, because you can't focus on one issue and do this one at a time. We don't have time for that. It's too complex. There's 10 or 12 major issues that have to be addressed. Whether they be a project or a process, they've got to be addressed. So deregulation. We've got to come in and we've got to accelerate that which was started by Governor Dunleavy, which is AO 360, which is deregulation. And we've got to work with the legislature, because if that regulation is supportive of statutory requirements, then we've got to go to the legislature and say, hey, times have changed, we don't need this regulation anymore, but I can't get rid of it because it satisfies some statutory requirement. Let's work together and remove that statutory requirement, change the law so we can get rid of the regulation. It doesn't always have to be that way, but it certainly does, and it's going to take cooperative effort. Coming back to your previous question, then, had I just cussed out that legislator a week before, do you think they're going to work with me?
Maybe hard.
They're not. They're all humans. And I think we need to collaborate a whole lot more and get along with people even as we fight for our values.
Let's go now into policy. I want to start first with the gas line. And when we were doing these conversations, I mean, they were upwards of 2 months prior, but now we're in this current moment. We'll have this interview hopefully up pretty shortly after this conversation. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the gas line? I saw you in Juneau several times, testifying on why it's important. Now we're at a really uncertain point with the gas line. Lawmakers say it doesn't have the votes. The governor's new version of the bill with a smaller S-corp tax, 2%. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what this moment looks like for you? And if you get elected as Alaska's next governor, it's likely up to the next governor to get this gas line.
Yeah, and the Senate has driven it that way. And the Senate has the authority to control the clock in their own house and in their business, and I appreciate that. It seems like they're bound and determined to wait till the next governor, I should say, and that's fine with me. I'll work with them. We'll get it done. I believe quite firmly that the S-corp thing should be a set-aside and dealt with separately, because the first version of the S-corp wasn't well thought through. And we need to define revenue better. We need to do a lot of things in that. So let's set that aside and let's work with that. But we've got to get in there and get the gas line done. We've just lost a season. When you lose a season, you lose a year. And I look at the natural gas shortage or non-existence of it in, say, Fairbanks. And I see people leaving the state because they can't afford to heat their homes when it's 40 below or even 20 below. So this is real serious. I think we need to focus on what's best for the people and less on what's best for just the Treasury. Yeah. And of course, there's the legislature is deeply focused on that, and they're the appropriating body, and they need to focus on the Treasury, but don't forget the people, because the people is what matters.
How do you think you're going to be able to kind of reach some sort of compromise within this fracture? Because it seems like in this news plan, Governor had a compromise. He was very staunchly opposed to the S-corp. He included it, and now the majority says even the minority doesn't have the votes. I think the minority is largely disputing that, but I mean, it really seems like we're in a very fractured position at the moment.
Well, I'm going to let them, fight with each other. The governor's got a few more months to go. I'm going to stay out of that. I'm going to start afresh with the legislature in a new session and sit down at the table. And obviously, the starting point is what we have right now, and move forward. But we can't waste another year. People are going to suffer, because what government does in 1 year sometimes really impacts what happens 5 or 10 or even 50 years later. And we've got to keep that in mind. There's a real longevity to this, or the impacts of current decisions, and we've just got to make the best. We know we need natural gas. We know that. Let's get it to Cook Inlet. Support Cook Inlet. The basin as it produces. Get the natural gas, drive down the costs, and then get the liquefaction phase 2 as soon as possible, so we can export, and then really drive down the cost of natural gas for Alaskans, all Alaskans.
Let's go into a little bit broader on this topic. Energy and resource development, obviously crucial for the state, makes up such a significant portion of the budget. And then you also have this, what looks like an impending South Central and even rail belt crisis when it comes to energy as well. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your approach to addressing not only some of those energy crisis concerns, but also really making sure that Alaska is reaping its resources?
Well, I think it's one and the same. If you access your resources, if private enterprise comes in and develops your resources, and then we tax them fairly to get those resources either to us or to market, that's what we've got to do. The gas line, the 42-inch line, solves a lot of our problems. The problem I have is we seem to leap from crisis to crisis to crisis. We were here in 2012. you know, and that's when Hillcorp came in, 2011, 12, 13. Hillcorp came in and helped us solve our Cook Inlet natural gas crisis. And we created a thing with the legislature, and there's a lot of folks in the legislature did yeoman's work on that. We created SINGSA, Cook Inlet Natural Gas Storage Area, so that in the summertime, you know, excess gas production goes into this underground storage so that when we need it in February, it's there. We're running out of that shock absorber. That's what's going on. And it's not that we're short of gas. It's that we're short of contracted delivery for gas. That's what's important. We have quite a bit of gas in Cook Inlet, 19 trillion cubic feet of reserves and 3 trillion cubic feet of proven reserves. And so we've got enough to get us through, but we've got to keep drilling in the inlet even as we develop a 42-inch gas line to water line.
And you said right there, crisis to crisis. And I remember lawmakers in Juneau talking about that too, and how, you know, lawmakers often feel like they have to address issues when they are a crisis and not preemptively before they become a crisis. And I think the answer that a lot of them had pretty consistently was, we just don't have the revenue to address it until it is a crisis, which brings up the question, how does the state get new revenue?
Well, I don't know if the revenue magically appears to solve a crisis. It's not happening this time. Is what we have is we have a bit of a political crisis that I think we're coming out of. And again, when the federal government, who owns most of the land in the state, limits your access to that land, actually just shuts it off, that's a problem. So a lot of this we can dump on the previous administration federally, and you know, we're not a colony. We're not a resource colony. We're not like a cobalt mine in the Congo or something like that. This is Alaska. We're a state, and I'm quite frankly, whether it's mining or fisheries or anything else, I'm getting sick and tired of being treated like a colony. We need what every other state has had as we've developed from east to west, and we got to knock this stuff off.
Tell me about the cost.
No, go ahead.
Tell me a little bit about the cost of living and affordability. I mean, these are issues that we're hearing not only in the state, of course, and a lot of different disparities when you go maybe more north or south than where we're talking here in Anchorage. So cost of living, affordability certainly concerns going into this election. How do you plan to, you know, as governor, I know you don't have a magic wand to make sure everyone has cheaper gas or cheaper groceries, but what can you do as a governor to make sure that it's more affordable to live in Alaska?
Well, first and foremost, when we talk about deregulation, get government out of the way of regulations that apply to technologies that don't exist anymore. We've got to get to yes on these projects, and I know that's a catchphrase, but it actually highlights a philosophy. I saw that in government in the city. You try to break the bureaucracies out of their protecting themselves and not advancing the greater cause for the people. That's what we've got to get to, because as we poll across the state, the cost of living is the single biggest issue. How it manifests or presents itself is different. Housing is universal. The cost of housing is too expensive. From Ketchikan to Fairbanks, and I've spent a lot of time. I think I've been in Ketchikan 7 times. I've been in Fairbanks 13 or 14 times in this campaign, and it's universal. Now the cost of heat in Southeast isn't an issue. The cost of heat in Fairbanks is a crisis. And I mean, you think it's bad here, or it's going to get bad here? It's already a crisis mode in Fairbanks. But it's the cost of living, and we simply need to develop. We need to extract wealth from our land to create prosperity, so we can have a functioning economy and a functioning society. Otherwise, we're going to keep in this steady decline. We're just going to keep going down, and I'm not going to stand for that.
And then switching gears again, public safety is also a massive concern, not only here in Anchorage, but across the state as well. Obviously, very hard question to answer, but how do you really plan to address a lot of these very different public safety concerns?
Well, they're diversified. You know, the village public safety officers, that program I think needs to be supported robustly. The troopers, you know, recruitment and retention at the troopers, just like I had at APD, was a challenge. That's why I gave the Anchorage Police Department, the rank and file, I gave them, well, actually leadership as well, the highest pay increase in the history of the city. And that's because we were not recruiting, we were not retaining at levels that we needed, and pay was a big part of that. We also got them newer vehicles. They were driving around with vehicles with 250,000 miles on them, breaking down in the middle of chases. That kind of stuff, you got to get into the fundamentals. You got to understand those problems and understand what motivates the people that execute our public safety, which is police, which is fire. I came in and I bought a lot of new equipment, ladders and trucks for our fire department. In a very constrained financial environment, I saw the importance of it. I had a fantastic fire chief, and he and I worked together to get that equipment.
Last policy question, ranked choice voting. We're seeing a lot of advertising about it. Vote yes or no on number 2. That'll be the number 2 from the show.
It's only yes.
Only yes, okay. And that's going to be on
no on one.
No on one.
No on one, yes.
Which is on the
2.
August ballot
Yeah.
copy. Why don't you tell me a little bit just about your perspective on ranked choice voting and
well,
the ballot proposition?
ranked choice voting was brought to us. I think it was false advertising. They came and says, let's keep dark money out of Alaska. It was dark money promoting ranked choice voting. That's what it is. And ballot measure 1 is the exact same thing. It's just the new version of ranked choice voting. Stop it. It limits contributions by Alaskans, and we shouldn't do that. Alaskans should be able to donate. I think it's a free speech issue. Political speech through spending money is a free speech issue, and that's what ballot measure 1 is trying to curtail. It's going to allow all these outside entities come in and spend what they want, but the local Alaskan can't spend what he wants to spend on his candidate or his issue or whatever. So no on 1, yes on 2.
There you go.
And 2 is in November, on November 3rd. Yes on 1 is this week. So, it's August 18th.
Why do you think that issue is getting so much traction 3 months out from November?
Which one?
Ranked choice voting.
Oh, it's had traction for several years.
Yeah.
Lots of traction.
Yeah.
And finally this time we have the financing to come in and defeat that.
Gotcha. Last 2 questions for you. We're switching gears into outside policy altogether. Why should Alaskans vote for you, Dave Bronson?
Well, we've got a lot of problems to solve, and you want the most experience to solve that problem. So you got to come in, you got to ask a few questions of a candidate. So does that candidate ideologically agree with me? And I look at the political, or the 14 or 15 Republicans in the race. We're all pretty darn close. Then you have to ask the second question, which was, can they do the job? Do they have the experience to do the job? That field just got really limited. Experience matters. And then third question is can they actually win? And you've got to get to a yes on all 3 of them to make this work for you as a voter. And so we look at the polling, and the polling's pretty clear. There's only a couple people on the Republican side that's going to be in the top 4.
And is that what you think makes you stand out from the other 14 Republicans running for
the seat?
Well,
I think reasonable people can get to a yes on all 3 of those questions.
Gotcha. My last question for you, I ask every candidate this question. What does it mean to be Alaskan?
Well, it's my identity. It lives at the core of me. I came up here 35 years ago for 2 years. The airline sent me up here. I flew 747s, and I came up here, and I was always a hunt, fish, and fly guy. That was my whole life, trapping. I just wanted to be out. I'm happiest when I'm alone and I'm in the woods. That's just me. And I came up here, and obviously I flunked public math because my 2-year commitment that I signed on to with Northwest Airlines, I'm now at 35 years, and it's just me. My kids have been born here, are raised here. I'm going to have my first grandkid here in February. It's my identity. I can't imagine living anywhere else. I go visit Hawaii for a week. I'm done. It's good. I love the sun, love the heat. I'm always coming home.
Former Anchorage Mayor Dave Bronson.
Yes, thanks
for your time, sir.
Thanks, Will.